Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of The Waiting Room. Thank you for joining me on another episode. Thank you for tuning in. I feel like today this is going to be another really good episode. And let's just get straight into it. We're going to talk about today something that I feel has been very twisted now in today's world, especially in today's world where a lot of the things that we think are right are based on the standards that the world has placed and just the basic societal norms that the world gives and we feel like we need to follow. So, we're going to be talking about what love really is today. And when we think about love, I think that the first thing that comes to mind is those times where, you go to your class and, it's Valentine's Day and they got the Valentine's Day grams and, you got so and so gave this gram to so and so and, you got couples walking down the halls and then, out in the streets, you have people going out for dinners and, having all these different intimate moments with each other to celebrate their love. And to a certain point, that's what love can be, is the affection towards one another. But now in today's world, love has been something that has been twisted and something that has been fitted to something that God never put a standard to. They teach that love is an emotion, that you have to feel something in order for it to be true love, that if you don't feel anything, that it's not love. That you have to act on the emotions that you feel, because if you don't act on it, that the feeling of love is going to fade away and you're going to lose it. And then they even teach that sex is something crucial for love, that if it's not good, then it's not love, right? And if they don't make love well to you, then they don't really love you, and then it's not meant to be. And many times I feel like that's why a lot of relationships don't last, is because they really base their relationship on that sex has to be something that needs to be done well in order for a relationship to thrive and to be something good. And the world teaches that love is hard to find based on all of these things. But if we look at the Bible, love has a different definition than from what the world gives. First John chapter 4 verse 7 to 10, it says, "Dear friends, we should love each other because love comes from God. Everyone who loves has become God's child and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love to us. He sent his one and only Son into the world so that we could have life through him. This is what real love is. It is not our love for God, it is God's love for us. He sent his Son to die in our place to take away our sins." And so when we look at the Bible, it says that God is love because the love that he gives is an action, right? Love in general is an action. It's not just an emotion, because many times we feel that just because we're not feeling the emotion of love, then it's not something that is real. If we don't feel God's presence, then God's not with us. If we don't feel like our significant other is doing enough for us to feel good, then love is not present in the relationship. But if we look at the Bible, it says that God is love because he forgave our sins through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So it's a sacrificial love that God gives. And in that sacrificial love, it's an action, right? We look at the example of this kind of love, right? It's patient, it's kind, it's understanding, it's merciful. And God shows us that kind of love through Jesus Christ, and he expects us to have that kind of love as well, because Jesus came and lived this life in order for us to follow that life, that example that he lived. We're not going to be perfect and we're not going to live it to that certain point, But what he did want us to do is to take into an account everything that he did, the way that he lived his life here, and follow that example and try to live the best that we can according to God's standard. So how do we show God's love, right? So as I said before, this love isn't an emotion, it's an action, right? I don't think that, Jesus being the powerful person that he was, right, said, I'm gonna go down and I'm going to feel good, right? Putting my life on the line for every single one of these people that I'm trying to save, right? Because I'm pretty sure that if you were to put yourself in that position, then the first thing you'd want to do is to back out. Like what kind of person am I going to be to go and have to suffer all the things that Jesus went through just for some people not to love me back, right? And that is the true definition of love, right? Even knowing that Jesus was going to suffer, even knowing that he was going to have to endure so much pain and so much suffering after being loved by many people, right? He still decided to put his life on the line, and that is the kind of love that Jesus wants us to have. The kind of example that he wants us to follow is to be able to have that sacrificial love and say that it's not about me. It's not about what I feel. It's not about what I desire, but it's the way that I'm willing to put everything on the line for this person, right? And so a lot of people say that they can love, and a lot of people think that they do love, but in reality, they could have hatred in their heart, right? Some may have lack of forgiveness, and some may have grudges and vendettas. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 16 to 18, it says, You will know these people by what they do. Grapes don't come from thorn bushes, and figs don't come from thorny weeds. In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. So, metaphorically speaking, we're not just talking about fruits, because God's love is the essence of what the fruit of the spirits are, right? So when it talks about the kind of fruits that people bear, there's two kinds of fruit. You have fruit from the world, and then you have fruit of God. And so the fruit of the spirit, to say. So when people come into your life and you want to really know whether or not they're being genuine with their actions and what they say, you have to look at the fruits that they bear, because the world produces all those fruits that are very bitter, that at first seem sweet, that they look appetizing, but in reality, they're fruits that aren't going to do you any good. And so when we look at the fruits that God gives, they're a lot different, and you can really see the differences. But first, touching upon the fact that Jesus came to be a perfect example of what pure love is supposed to look like. Love isn't based on emotions or feelings, because feeling fades and they're unstable, and the Bible says that they could be like the waves and the wind, just like how we doubt, right? It's like we're easily moved around by the waves and the wind. And so you can love one day and hate the next, and then you can love your partner one day, and maybe the next you can't even stand them. And so that's why our relationships have to be a reflection of God's love, because relationships and friendships are meant to reflect God's love, right? If we're talking about relationships aren't perfect, right? There's going to be issues, but when you are in a relationship with somebody, that is where true love really begins to grow. Because if you really do love this person, no matter how many problems, no matter what you guys go through, right? You guys are going to find the love that you have for each other and work through those problems. You guys are going to be patient with each other. You guys are going to be understanding with each other. You guys are going to truly love each other, because no relationship is perfect. No friendship is perfect, but the thing is, if we apply God's love into our relationships and our friendships and into our daily lives, then we can begin to see a change or a shift in how we see things and how we're able to handle our situations, right? You know, and I think I think it's very important to keep that in mind, because A lot of people nowadays, especially because of the standards that the world put, right? That if you don't feel nothing with your partner, then it's not love. And, you have the right to go look for that love, right? With us, you shouldn't love your partner any less. For Christians, right, applying this kind of love to your life, you shouldn't seek others to make you happy because only God could bring true happiness. That's why it is very important to have God in the center of every relationship, of every friendship, of every situation, because God is the only one that could bring that true peace, that true happiness, love, that true love into every relationship so that it can bear fruit and not be like those thorn bushes that cannot, or the fig trees that cannot bear fruit and have to be torn down and thrown into the fire. So if we look at God's love, right, we look at what it is, what it holds. First Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 through 7 says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous. It does not brag, and it is not proud. Love is not rude. It is not selfish, and does not get upset with others. Love does not count up wrongs that have been done. Love takes no pleasure in evil, but rejoices over the truth. Love patiently accepts all things. It always trusts, always hopes, and always endures. So, when looking at this, we can very easily see the differences between love that comes from the world, but also love that comes from God. A lot of people get jealous of one another, or the things that they have, or the things that they don't have. And whenever they do have those things, they tend to brag about all the good things that they have, and they're proud of those things. But it says that love is not jealous, and it does not brag, and it is not it's not proud. And then sometimes we get very upset with our partner. We get very upset with our friends and with our family and with our coworkers and even the people with the church. And we get very impatient and start to kind of shift away from that kind of love because things aren't done in our own time. Things aren't made to happen in our own time. And because of that, we get upset and we tend to lash out at others, and we become rude and disrespectful. And so right here it says love is not rude, it is not selfish, and it does not get upset with others. And we tend to do the opposite just because things don't happen on our time, or things aren't done in the way that we would want them. And it says love takes no pleasure in evil, but rejoices over the truth. Sometimes, when you're in a relationship or when you're doing things with other people, and things are hidden, and you feel fine having to hide those things from other people. But in reality, that is not love, because love doesn't rejoice in evil. The truth, Jesus says, will set you free. And there is always freedom, and there is always joy in the truth. So when it says that love patiently accepts all things, right, that means that no matter the hardships, no matter the problems, no matter the issues that come up, love endures, right? As it says here, love always endures, it always trusts, and it always hopes. So no matter all the problems that you face and the things that you go through, if you have that true love of God, right, you're always going to endure. You're always going to hope and trust. And that doesn't just apply to relationships, but it applies to God, because many times we go through a lot of different situations where we feel like God can't rescue us, and maybe we're too lost, and there's no way that we can get out of these places that we're stuck in. But true love with God, with that relationship that we have with God, would change that mentality, right? Because many times we just tend to think that because we're unworthy to be helped, then God doesn't look at us, and he pushes us away. But it's in those moments where you become humble and you begin to really dive deep into what it means to have a relationship with God, where you see that it's in those moments where God really does show up the most, and he really does help you when you really do need it, because he really always is present in every situation, and he's always listening to prayers. He's always there with us, sitting in the middle of the storm sometimes. Many times, sometimes, or sometimes he's just outside, and he's waiting for you to walk through that storm, because he knows the purpose, he knows the plans, and that's God's love, right? And when we look at all these things, right, we see the ways that we can apply it to our lives, right? We have to be patient and forgiving of others, and we have to be understanding and not be envious, but be happy for others. And in turn, that also means that we cannot focus on the outward appearance. First Samuel chapter 16 verse 7 says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him." The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Many times we can be very judgmental. We can look at people and judge a book by its cover, right? And that applies to a lot of things. That applies not only to the people on the outside, but also the people on the inside in the churches. We can be very judgmental based on what we see and how we feel, and especially in the community of the church, a lot of people who walk in and are seeking God, you know, they get judged based on their appearance. Homeless people when they walk in, or even sometimes people who may look different from us. We tend to really judge them based on how they look, and that's where God really looks at our heart and sees the posture of our heart, because that's how the Pharisees were. The Pharisees were the people who thought they were perfect. They thought that they knew the most. They thought that they were the ones worthy of receiving from God and from receiving of that blessing. But that's why Jesus calls them hypocrites, because they try to uphold the law, but yet they break it at the same time. And so that's why Jesus came down to abolish that law, because Christianity in itself isn't a religion, but it's a relationship that we have with God, right? And there's a quote that I heard that I really do like, that it says, "The church isn't filled with perfect people, but instead it's filled with broken people who seek to be healed." And so I think we can take the the comparison of a hospital, right? When you go to a hospital, the hospital isn't full of healthy people, but it is where sick people go to get healed, right? The church isn't perfect, and it's not going to be filled with perfect people. You're never going to find a perfect church. You're never going to find the people who go to church that are perfect, because we are all in need of Jesus. We all need God in our lives, and as many people who are prideful want to say that they don't need of God, or they don't need of His presence, are just foolish and blind, because we all need of God. The only reason that we're here, the only reason that I'm speaking to you now, is because it's God's mercy and His love that He allows me to sit here and to talk to you and to encourage you and to do all these kinds of things. And so when we look at Matthew chapter 25, verse 40, we look at what is the least of these, right? It says, "Then the king will answer, I tell you the truth, anything you do for even the least of my people here, you also did for me." And so we just go back into seeing the constant pattern of what love is, and how love isn't an emotion, or a feeling, it's an action, right? When we look at the least of these, we look at all these people who are poor and homeless and who need of God, right? And so, with that, God made everybody according to His image, and we are all His sons and daughters. So we have to all treat each other with respect. And so, when doing that, we have to take into an account that we can't just speak, words of like "God bless you," right? Because if there is no action behind the God bless you, then we are not really showing love, right? If I think there is a Bible verse that says that don't just say these things, but actually act on them, right? If you don't act on the things that you say, then there's no point in saying these things, because it's like saying that you love somebody but don't do anything about it. You really don't love the person. You really aren't showing God's love, because God says that He loves us, and He gave us the example by sending His Son to die for us. He says that He loves us and He forgives us for every sin, every trespass, every disrespectful thing that we've done, and that's God showing his love towards us. So something that we need to do is apply love into our lives, because love needs to be something that is part of our lifestyle. You know, helping the poor, helping people in need, spreading the gospel, being kind. All these things have to be a part of our lifestyle in order for us to truly start to see a change in our lives, and have to see how God's presence really does move in our lives. And so I think what really sets us off is how sometimes when we have plans and they don't happen according to the to the timing that we want them to happen, we tend to start to blame God, because we think that God really isn't paying attention to us, or he's not really on our side, and he's not trying to give us the things that we need. And that could really lead to a dark path where we begin to blame God and we begin to pull away from God, because we can't accept the fact that it's not on our timing, but it's on God's timing, right? Isaiah chapter 60, verse 22 says, "The smallest family will grow to 1,000. The least important of you will become a powerful nation. I am the Lord, and when it is time, I will make these things happen quickly." And so the Lord is always faithful with the things that he promises. He has never broken a promise. He will never break a promise, right? And so if he says that it will be done, it will be done. But we have to learn to accept that it is not with our timing, but it is with God's timing. But then also with that, we also have to accept that if God says no, then it has to be a no. We can't force anything that God doesn't want for our lives. Although we have free will and we may choose to go against God's will, that's a whole different subject, that's a whole different thing. But when we decide to align with God's will and we start to apply his love to our life, being patient, being kind, being gracious, being understanding of others and merciful towards others, and even to ourselves, we begin to see the fruits of the Spirit begin to grow in our lives. And then even God begins to recognize those things, and he begins to slowly build us up, and he begins to give us the things that we need. But everything happens in his perfect timing. And I think that's one of the most repeated um things that I've seen in not just my life but in the life of many people, because we are very impatient people. We think that because if we don't get it in the moment that we want it, it's going to be gone. And that is something that the world also applies as well, because they say that if you don't have it, you're going to miss out on it, right? And that is the influence that the world gives in order for them to try to confuse us, to try to convince us that it's something that we don't need, right? And when looking at that, I think it's something that God really wants us to get away from, because we become impatient. We try to help him with his plans and we end up ruining all the plans, right? There is a Bible verse that talks about how God is a potter, right? And um when he begins to mold us, he shapes us in his image, right? And I think I spoke about this before, but I think it's found in Isaiah 64 verse 8. And it just pretty much talks about how God is the one who forms us into a certain image. It says, Isaiah chapter 64 verse 8, it says, "But Lord, you are our Father. We are like clay and you are the potter. Your hands made us all." And so when we become impatient, we begin to try to add to God's plan, or try to do things ourselves to try to help him with his plan, right? And we end up ruining everything. And God already has this image set about us. He already has this picture painted and ready, but we begin to do things and we mess up the picture. We begin to kind of add our own touches to the project, then that's where it all comes crashing down, and God has to restore us, and he has to mold us, and he has to break us apart again, and it's a painful process. And even then we, blame God for the process that we put ourselves in. And that just shows the love that we have, right? Because if we truly had the love that God gives, we wouldn't be impatient. We wouldn't try to add our own touches to the project. We wouldn't try to help God do the things that he said he was going to do regardless, because it's not happening in our time. And so many times, we get together with the wrong people, we start relationships with the wrong people, we make bad choices, bad investment choices, all because we wanted things done on our time. Because the world told us that if we don't have it now, then we're going to miss out on it. But that's not true, because God is in control of everything. His hand is over everything. And there's always perfect timing with God. So if you don't have it now, then don't worry about it, because the Lord is going to give it to you in the right time. That person, that job, that car, that house, whatever it is that you want, right? The Lord is going to provide when the timing is right. And so, looking back at everything we talked about, right? The world just pretty much has twisted the meaning of love. They say that love is an emotion. If you don't feel anything, then it's not love. That if you don't feel happy, if you don't have that emotion of joy, then it's not love, right? They say that sex is the most important part of love in a relationship, but in reality, that's just a perk that gets added to love, that it gets added to a relationship, because sex is something that was blessed by God when done right within marriage. But the world has obstructed it to anybody can do whatever they want with their body, and that they could do whatever they want with whoever they want. But the Lord stands against that. And so, because we want to fit in, we feel like we have to be like that. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. The world teaches that love is hard to find, but in reality, love is found in God, and God is always here. So love is not hard to find, because God is love, and he shows us his love every single day by giving us his mercy and allowing us to be here, and allowing us to wake up to another day. And so it pretty much depends on your mentality and the way that you look at things, because if you look at things in the incorrect way, then you're going to overlook the blessings and just look at the curses, right? I think a lot of times many people who start to judge on Christians and start to tell them, "Oh, but you really follow all these rules, and you can't do this and you can't do that." Then what kind of love does God show by limiting you to not being able to do all these things? And God's not love because of this and that. But in reality, God loves us enough to put those boundaries on us, because he knows the things that will happen if we have complete freedom in doing whatever we want. But even in that way, God still loves us, because he gave us free will. We have free will to make our choices, and that is love. Because if a God who forces you to love him, if a God forces you to make decisions based on what he wants and doesn't give you the choice to choose what you want to do, then that is not love, right? If a person comes up to you and forces you to marry them, then that is not love. But if you truly by yourself fall in love with this person and decide to marry them on your own accord, then that means that it was love, right? Because we have the option to choose. And looking at actions with love, we have to forgive, we have to be patient, we have to be kind with others, we have to be understanding and merciful, just as how God is all these things with us. And then we have to show that with not just our significant other, with our families, with our relatives, with our co-workers, with random people on the street, with the homeless, with everybody, because we can't spread the love of God. We can't spread the gospel if we are not living it. Because again, Christianity isn't a religion, it's a lifestyle. It's a relationship that we have with the Lord. So if we're not constantly living in that lifestyle of love, that true love that comes from God, then we cannot call ourselves Christians, because we don't bear those good fruits. We don't bear those fruits of the Spirit. We don't bear that love that God has. So, with that, you know, we always have to be forgiving and patient and not be envious. and always have love for others, and not look at what's on the outside, but look at what's on the inside. The things that really do matter, those fruits that the Lord gives, is what we're supposed to look for. Not for money, not for fame, not for a follower status, or for any of those things, because all those things are going to fade. Right? Everything materialistic we can't take with us. We can't take the money, we can't take the followers, we can't take the car, we can't take the phones, I can't take this microphone, I can't take none of the things that I'm using with me when I die. This body is going to rot, this body is going to die, but it's the way that we live in this world that truly matters. So we cannot be judgmental towards others. We cannot show love if we are not accepting of others. And that goes whether it's in the church or whether it's outside of the church. So thank you for tuning in to another episode. I appreciate you guys for listening in. I hope that this really did speak to whoever needed to hear this. And again, God bless you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.